Well, the NFL's wrestled with this problem for the last 5+ years since Ray Rice was caught on video and shown knocking out his then fiancee. It's created its own internal investigation department with a specialist in cases involving domestic abuse and has hired other legal professionals to try and help them sort out what to do in these situations. And each case seems to present a new wrinkle.
Welcome to HWTP Sports Talk with your host, David Weinstein. Keep it locked each Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern. And now, David Weinstein.
So today we're having a discussion with two people who have a little bit of insight on both sides of what's going on here. Joining us again is Ken Belson. Ken covers the NFL for the New York Times, a job that includes writing about the teams, the stadiums, medical issues, lawsuits, and many other elements of the country's biggest and most popular league. And on the other side of the equation, discussing the problems faced by victims in sexual assault cases is Hillary M. Nappi. Hillary's an attorney with Hach and Rose LLP in New York City, and her practice is in the area of complex civil litigation involving victims, including those who are children and minors, and she gives a voice to those victims. So, Ken, I'm going to start with you. We always talk about allegations that are made against individuals, and certainly the allegations that have come out about what Antonio Brown has done off the field are very severe. And he has a lawyer who represents him. The victim in that case has a lawyer representing her. But Antonio's been rather outspoken, and in many ways, that's what's resulted in the fact that he's not playing football. What should we expect going forward from here, and how else should Antonio be defending himself?
Well, the NFL's wrestled with this problem for the last 5+ years since Ray Rice was caught on video and shown knocking out his then fiancee. It's created its own internal investigation department with a specialist in cases involving domestic abuse and has hired other legal professionals to try and help them sort out what to do in these situations. And each case seems to present a new wrinkle and is complicated partly by things like video. In this case, that does not exist so far as we know. But there's each new case is another challenge for the NFL on what to do when it involves off-field behavior that in the past they used to simply rely on what police departments would tell them, and if a player was prosecuted or not, that gave them the sort of benchmark that they needed to make a decision on whether a player was suspended or fined or worse. In this case, they are not going to rely on that. There is no criminal charges here, only civil, and that also is a new wrinkle for the NFL. In many other cases, there's a criminal filing or at least an investigation. So it's a much different dispute than it has been in the past. The other element that's very different is that Brown isn't going quietly in any of this. He's been posting things on Twitter, and other things are bubbling out, text messages and so forth, that make this an extraordinarily public case in a way that I think makes the NFL uncomfortable, because it obviously puts more pressure on them to act. And I think they are trying to do this as deliberately as they can so that if the case is appealed in some format, they have a firm basis for their decisions. They also, and your guest could certainly talk more to this, are trying to be more cognizant of hearing out the victims. In the past, they got themselves in trouble because they interviewed victims in the room with the accusers, a boyfriend with a girlfriend, or a husband and a wife, and that's not a formula for success, from what I know. So they're trying to be a little more judicious in the way they act, and Brown is not making it easy, because he's spoken quite publicly about what he thinks of the accuser and accusers in this case.
And Hillary, that's a perfect way to lead into our part of the conversation with you. One of the things that people are saying, including Antonio Brown, was that the victim didn't come forward right after the attack. And as Ken mentioned, the NFL in the past has sought to interview victims in a way that's not conducive to a victim feeling that he or she is going to be able to speak out. What is it that you do to help the victims, and why is it that some of these victims just don't come out right away?
Thank you, David. I think it's a perfect segue because it's really a huge issue that survivors of sexual assault and sexual abuse face every day. I deal primarily with a lot of children, and I'm also dealing right now with a bunch of revival cases because New York has passed a new law in February that allows for old cases to be brought for a 1 year look back window. So I've had this conversation with a lot of my clients and with a lot of potential clients. And the reality is that survivors of sexual abuse are often plagued with fear about the stigma of reporting. And in some instances, if there's a close friend or a family member, or in the case of Antonio Brown, someone that, was an employer, um, that the victim doesn't feel comfortable, right? They are afraid that no one will believe them. They, in the context of children, also don't have the lexicon to express what has happened to them. Often, they don't realize it's wrong. So the stigma is a huge, huge deal. And then once victims come forward, they are slut shamed. I mean, I think that we see that in the Me Too movement. We see that every day, right? And you just have to go. You don't need a celebrity. Perpetrator, you just need to look at a basic rape case. Anytime a victim comes forward and discloses their sexual abuse or sexual assault, the person who's accused of committing the crime and the horrible act automatically either says it was consensual or turns around and blames the victim. It's a defense strategy. And if we think about it on a human level, most people are not going to admit that. Our firm handles these cases on a very comprehensive level. I encourage my clients to talk with a therapist. So even though I am a lawyer and I can protect them in a courtroom and I can advocate for them and be their face publicly, I don't have the tools to help them deal with the stress and the anxiety that comes with disclosing. And we often see that people who have been victimized very young, and even, at any age really, they suffer from PTSD and sometimes complex PTSD. So as a lawyer, you have to understand that, right? I mean, that sometimes affects people's recollections. They can't recall the specific details of what happened to them in a linear manner. So they have all the details and they have what you need to file your lawsuit and to, prosecute their claims, but it's hard for them to get it out. And they need to feel comfortable. It's in any relationship with an attorney, a client needs to have trust in that attorney, but more so with these cases.
And so with Antonio Brown, he seems to be taking that posture of deflect whatever wrongdoing is alleged to have taken part on his behalf and put it on the victim, claim that she's a gold digger, point the finger at the owner of the team he was most recently with, and say he was given special treatment for the case that he was involved in. How is that, do you think, affecting the public perception of Antonio Brown and their judgment without knowing all the facts on his guilt or his innocence? I know that he's lost a couple of endorsements. Uh, do you think that he's either not listening to his PR people, or that he just feels that he was wronged here and that he's
Both.
going to speak out no matter what somebody has to say?
If he's getting any advice, he's not listening to it, because I'm sure the advice would be to keep quiet, and don't make it any more difficult on yourself. It's worth noting that although the NFL has penalties and for domestic abuse and sexual abuse and other violent crimes, it's not a table of penalties. There's no specific formula, although they claim that they have minimum standards. They're frankly all over. The league has been all over the map, and not just this league, but others. And so, what I think he's doing is adding the intangible factor, which in the case of the NFL, from what I understand, they want to see some repentance for what's happened, even if you claim you're innocent. And he's not making it easy on himself by continuing lashing out in public. If he had done so in private, that's one thing, but to do it in public, he's now putting the NFL in another awkward position too, and only ratcheting up the pressure on himself. So I'm not sure why he's doing it. He may just be doing it because he can. There's others who do the same thing, as we know, in public life. So he may have anger management issues of his own that he wants to that is on full display. I'm not sure. He's likely to file some grievances with the union over his lost pay for being released by two different teams in a short period, and those may highlight the issue even further. But I don't think he's listening to whatever PR strategy he's getting, and I'm not sure what his strategy is other than to sort of say what's on his mind.
You're listening to HWTP Sports Talk with David Weinstein, recognized by our guests and listeners for our no-holds-barred good questions and informed conversation. Don't be shy. Post your questions and comments at #AskHWTP.
Of my conversation with Hillary Nappi of the law firm Hach and Rose LLP. She represents victims and is an advocate for individuals who have been wronged, and with Ken Belson, who covers the NFL for the New York Times. Hillary, getting back to the situation of what the NFL is trying to do and what you do to assist victims and get their voices heard. The NFL recently has made some hires in their departments to investigate and look into these issues. Some of these people have backgrounds in prosecution, if in cases that involve victims. Do you think that it's helping them both with the public relations aspect, and from what you've been able to see, are these people the right people for the job, and are they actually giving victims voices and opportunity to be heard?
I wish I could say that I thought that anyone an entity hires to give a voice to a victim actually gives a voice to a victim. I personally don't know that I believe that. I think that entities like the NFL and the church and the Boy Scouts recognize the time that we live in, and our society has moved very quickly to have a conversation that I think tells society that sexual harassment and sexual abuse and sexual assault is not okay. And so I'm proud that entities like the NFL are taking that step, but I think it's more out of self-protection. The fact of the matter is, if policies were in place that really um, penalized the behavior, it wouldn't occur. And I think that institutions recognize that they now have liability. And so, with that liability, they are doing things to try to combat it, right? And to try to be proactive, to say, hey, we take this hardline stance and we're not going to allow members of our organization to victimize other people. A large part of it, right, comes down to an individual's behavior. So, I don't know that. It's about having the right person. I think that it has to be a commitment that institutions and individuals make to just be better. I think we'll always deal with this issue, but I think now the conversation is more out in the open. So businesses like the NFL are going to be more cognizant of it. And I also think that victims are now feeling like they're being heard in some arenas, so they're more apt to come forward.
So going back again, Hillary, to the victims, do you think that in cases like this where you're dealing with a high-profile accused abuser, do you think that there's a bias in favor of the victim or in favor of the high-profile accused abuser? Is one of them treated better than the other because of the high profile of the abuser?
Honestly, I think it depends who you talk to. I don't think that someone's stature in the public makes it any easier for them to be accused of sexual assault or sexual abuse. And I think the minute anyone accuses an individual of that, right, people in that person's camp and in a public arena, people who think they know that person because they've seen them on a football field or on a basketball court or read about them in the news, feel a personal connection. So they rush to defend. And those people will be rushing to accuse a victim of looking for money or, fame. I think people who have been victimized in any way or people who have been traumatized in any way say, this was a hard thing for this person to do, and we need to give them the benefit of doubt. But I think it's a very individualized view.
Ken, turning back to the NFL, we saw how quickly they disposed of cases involving Adrian Peterson, Tyreek Hill, Hunt, the running back who had been with both Cleveland and Kansas City. They seem to be really dragging their feet on this Antonio Brown case, and in some ways denying him an opportunity to play for a football team, regardless of what was going on. Some say that's a reaction to the distraction he's caused in this 100-year celebration for the NFL. Any ideas
Well,
on
I'm not sure they are.
why the NFL
I
seems
think
to be dragging
they,
their feet so much on this
what
one?
it's been, the lawsuit was filed maybe less than a month ago. So that's not a very long time. I mean, the Kareem
Hmm.
Hunt case, the video, well, the actual incident that was caught on video was in February of last year, and there were two other incidents that happened afterwards that actually produced police reports. And it only came out in the news in, I believe it was November. And then after that, they did take action. But these cases all have different wrinkles. The Tyreek Hill case was even more complicated. They had audio, they had the wife involved, they had a child involved. The prosecutor even said he felt like there was something there, but he didn't have enough to charge, and that took a long time as well. The league can put you on the commissioner's exempt list, which is essentially suspension without pay while they figure this out. But now that Brown's not on a team, they in fact have in some ways more time to figure this out because he's not going to cost any owner any money for not playing or for not being able to be on the field. So I'm not so sure. 1 month seems, especially in a civil case where there's no law enforcement to follow either. This may take a couple more months to sort out. But again, they're not under pressure because he's not on the field. So which is the
Hmm.
NFL's worst nightmare is to have this sort of PR
Right.
spectacle overtake the due diligence they're trying to do. And I think they're trying, but this is a complicated case, and there may be the second accuser that we know of also. I did see one story that said that the first accuser was meeting with the NFL for 10 hours. I'm not sure whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it suggests they're trying to take it seriously.
So Hillary, when somebody has to sit down and recount their story as Ken mentioned, for almost 10 hours, what does that do to the accuser, and how do you help these people get through that and understand that they're not being victimized again, as much as it might seem that they are, but rather they're getting an opportunity to make sure that people are aware of what happened to them? That's part one of my question. And then for both of you, looking at this from a social issue, you throw in Johnny Manziel and Ezekiel Elliott, as well as some other incidents that we know have occurred in college sports. It seems to be that athletes are either more at risk for being involved in something like this for some reason, or there's just more publicity about it. Uh, what do you think is going on in terms of the attitudes that an athlete has that puts him or her in this unfortunate situation?
So first, I can only speak to how I treat my clients, and I let them know that it's going to be a very uncomfortable process if you choose to litigate and even just bring a claim about this civilly, right? You have to be prepared to talk about the worst thing that ever happened to you with a room full of strangers. And so I sit with my clients for as long as they need. Sometimes my days are exceptionally long because of it, but they feel comfortable with me. And they know that they're never walking into a room without me next to them. So they know that through a deposition, I'm sitting next to them. They know that we go to court, I'm the one standing up and talking. They know that they are going to have my support in a mediation or, in an arbitration if we choose to go that route. And I think that that goes a long way. I think the biggest thing for my clients is they know that they can rely on my firm, right? And so it's not a car accident case. It's not a breach of contract. It's not a shareholder action. There is a level of personal shame and embarrassment when you talk about things that just aren't comfortable. I mean, they're not comfortable for anybody to talk about. So I think that that's the first part of it. I think the other part of it is letting them know that the more they talk about it with me, the more comfortable they feel in discussing it and actually using words that may offend some people. So once they get used to that, I find that the first 2 or 3 times they have to say something to me, it's not pleasant. By the third time, they're much more comfortable. And then when we walk into a courtroom or we walk into a deposition, the fear and the shame part has been minimized for them. I hope other lawyers that are handling these types of cases do the same thing, but I can only speak for our firm. In terms of athletes and what, in my view, puts them at risk, I think it's a societal issue in the sense that America, you know, places a huge importance on sports. Football in particular, it is like a religion in this country. And so I think that just like in anything where people are given authority and power, they take that to the extreme. I don't think that every person that is an athlete does that, either on a college level or a professional level, but I think quite a few people do. And I think that it's a personality trait that leads to being an abuser, right? Rape is about power and control. It's not about the sex aspect for a lot of people. And so if we're talking about rape and power and control, someone who already feels that they are above society has no problem exerting that power and
Yeah,
control over someone else.
Ken, any thoughts on what might play into
yeah, and I
this,
just want to
or
echo. I
we're
mean, I can
seeing a
imagine
lot of publicity
the
because these people are
difficulty
athletes?
of a woman having to go to any um, deposition to talk about this issue, and then you have to go do it at NFL headquarters, and all that. Literally walk into the lobby of the NFL headquarters, and the Lombardi Trophy is there, and all the Super Bowl rings, and the TV highlights are on the screen behind the receptionist. It's an intimidating place. I mean, it's either a fun place if you happen to love football, but if you're in there and you're not just talking about a player who may have abused you, but you're essentially taking on the biggest sports league in America. And I, they're not going to go meet you at Starbucks or some other place. They're generally going to ask you to come into their office, and that can be in a very intimidating place. And I don't think they're trying to browbeat anybody, but you're going. You're doing more than just simply accusing a football player. You're accusing a football player at the highest level of the game, and I can't believe that's a very comfortable place to be.
No, I can't either. Hillary, I think you're right. I think that uh, the other attorneys who engage in just that same type of representation for these individuals have to be giving their clients the same type of comfort and advice and assurances. Otherwise, these victims wouldn't be coming forward and bringing these actions. I think we saw a lot of that in the Cosby case. I think we've seen a lot of that recently in some of the allegations that were brought forward against Jeff Epstein, both down here in Florida and up in New York as well. So I think that the advocates who are out there for the victims are trying to do their best to give these people some support and help them understand that despite what's happened to them, that there are people who are looking out for them. Ken, on the bigger question of why these athletes keep finding themselves in these situations, do you think it's based on background where some of these athletes have come from, their quick rise to both fame and in many cases fortune, and they find themselves in a situation where they've always had the upper hand and now have some financial ability to go with it? Or do you think it's just
It's a little
a
bit of
situation
both.
that occurs in
I don't
any
know how much
aspect
of
of
it comes
society
from
and there's
people's
just more
social
publicity
backgrounds,
drawn to
but
this?
people forget a lot of these players are actually quite young. Um, they're in their early 20s, generally have been cloistered in the sense that they've been around teams and treated deferentially for many years, up to their college careers and then professional years. So they, in a weird way, they live in a kind of bubble, self-reinforcing bubble that congratulates them for their athletic achievement, but probably shields them from other realities. Some of them may come from abused homes where abuse took place as well. And I can't speak for all players. It really runs the gamut. And the other thing is, once you get to the NFL, you're perceived to be an adult. The teams treat you that way, and although some coaches will take you on, an older player might treat you as a mentor, take you under their wing. A lot of players, when the practices are over, they go home to their families. So you've got young people with more money than they probably ever imagined, with a lot of free time. And that's a formula for a lot of problems, not just domestic abuse, drinking and driving, other things that happen. And so, these aren't it's not to say that domestic abuse doesn't happen with people who are older, but this is a kind of very volatile mixture.
We've been having a conversation with Ken Belson, who covers the NFL for the New York Times, and Hillary Nappi of the law firm Hach and Rose LLP, who represents victims in sexual abuse cases. One last thing I want to talk about before I let you both go, and I guess I'll throw it back to you first, Hillary. Whatever the outcome is, either with this Antonio Brown case or the next case that comes out, what type of words of encouragement can you give to victims who might be afraid to speak out? People like Simone Biles who were in a situation where she was being abused and she didn't even know it, or in cases where people are being abused by people who either have authority positions over them or they're just afraid to come and speak out. What sort of encouragement can you offer to them?
Keep telling your story. Everything that I've marshaled from talking to clients and potential clients is that nothing makes them whole. No amount of money that they recover from a lawsuit, years and years of therapy and unpacking the trauma that's come with being abused. But they find that when they're allowed to speak their truth and they find someone that kind of holds space for that, they feel empowered. And, I tell all of my clients, you get to set the tone for what I'm doing for you. If you want to litigate, I'm going to litigate. If you want to settle, I'm going to do my best to try to work out a settlement for you. For a lot of people, it's just the feeling that someone is going to listen to them. And, just to circle back to New York State's recent legislation, the Child Victims Act has given people who have been silent for years the ability to now come forward and have their day in court. And those filings are not easy, right? Filing a summons and complaint with a court and making that a publicly available document puts that out there for the world. And in the age that we live in, where anything is accessible on Google, it's a big deal for these people, because now people in their life who didn't know are aware of what they went through and are aware of what they're going through as they litigate. So keep telling your story. People will listen, and people
Ken,
do care.
for you, as you pointed out, this has really been only a month since we've seen these allegations against Antonio Brown. It's going to take quite some time before it's resolved. Short of an exoneration of him, either by the NFL or in the court system, and somebody coming out and saying, no, that's not the way it happened. He, was wrongly accused and it didn't happen. Given his public statements and everything else, realistically, do you think he'll be able to play football again? And if it comes out that he, in fact, did commit the acts that he's accused of doing, and the NFL lets him play again, do you think that's going to put a permanent black eye on the NFL, or do you think he'd fall into that category of
It's
people
hard to
who make
speak
a
for all the
mistake
owners.
and
Two have already
if it was
tried, actually
wrong or the
three.
mistake, you ought to give
Pittsburgh,
them a second
Oakland,
chance?
and New England have tried, and I can't imagine him going back to any of those clubs. A lot of owners, from what I can tell, tend to just follow the trend in the league, and if most teams are shunning Antonio Brown, they'll stay away too. I think the other thing is and this is true of a lot of locker rooms with football in particular, is the coaches want, essentially to create an army, a division, and so they're not interested in distractions and anything. They'll tolerate a certain amount of outlandish behavior, but anything that takes away from their attempts to build a fighting unit of football players is really unwelcome. And that if Antonio Brown gets re-signed, there's going to be 5 times as many TV cameras showing up. The coach is going to be asked about it. The general manager is going to be questioned. The owner's intentions are going to be questioned. The league itself will be questioned, and it's going to turn into a media circus. Even if Antonio Brown never says a single word, and that's usually something coaches particular don't want. The other thing is the other 52 players in the club are going to be asked about Antonio Brown. So it ends up being very divisive. Whether he's going to change his behavior, I can't tell. At least by the last few weeks, his statements suggest no. He's getting to be 31. I'm sure he's very talented, but a lot of teams may just take a pass on him at this point.
Well, Hillary and Ken, thank you both very much for joining us and discussing this topic. It's not an easy topic to discuss, and
Sure
unfortunately, it's
thing.
one that keeps coming back and forth. Again, appreciate both of you taking time out from your day. Thank you for listening to our show. I'm David Weinstein, the host of Huddle In with the Pro Sports Talk. By day, I practice criminal defense law with Hinshaw and Culbertson in Miami, Florida. But once a week, you can find me here on HWTP Radio. Remember, you can find a new episode of Huddle In with the Pro Sports Talk every Wednesday at hwtpradio.com. We're the podcast that tackles all the controversial hot button issues from the world of sports, recognized by our guests and listeners for our hashtag No Holds Barred, Good Questions, and Informed Conversation. The show is produced by Jacqueline Park and is a Sweet G Communications production. Special thanks to our guests, Hillary M. Nappi of Hach and Rose LLP, and Ken Belson, who covers the NFL for the New York Times. You can follow Ken on Twitter at EL_Belson, BELSON, and you can look for Hillary online at Hach and Rose LLP. Thanks also to our great Huddle In with the Pros team. Watch for tweets from Rachel Lena. Be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at HWTP Sports Talk. Missed a show? Visit our website at hwtpradio.com and download our podcast on your smart device. Well, goodbye for now. We'll see you next week.